come forward and be sworn by the court, please.
Raise your right hand and be sworn. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Tell us your name, please.
My name is Sabrina Seehaffer, Seehaffer.
What is your occupation?
I'm employed as a criminalist in the DNA section for the State of Iowa Department of Public Safety, Division of Criminal Investigations, Criminalistics Laboratory, better known as the DCI Crime Lab.
Will you review for us your training, education, and experience in your field?
I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Westminster College, a master's and a PhD in biochemistry from University of Rochester in Rochester, New York. Then I was hired by the DCI Crime Laboratory, in which I completed the 6-month training program that meets all the guidelines as set forth by the FBI DNA Advisory Board. In addition, I am certified with the American Board of Criminalistics as a fellow in molecular biology. I also have over 200 hours of continuing education credits specifically in forensic DNA analysis.
Over 200 hours in what?
Forensic DNA analysis.
And when did you begin working for the DCI?
February 2009.
Do you work with Paul Bush? He testified earlier in this case.
Yes, he's my supervisor.
And tell us what your daily duties are with regard to being a criminalist.
My daily duties, specifically, I'm assigned to the DNA section. So I don't have a daily duty, I have a typical month. I'm assigned cases. I would check out cases from the evidence room. I would examine those evidence for the presence of biological fluids, or examine something for touch DNA, take a sample. At that point, I put my sample in the tube, and then I would move on to my other cases, cleaning every time in between every item, every case, changing gloves, and then every case has a typical flow. We first do what's called extraction. Think of it separating the DNA off the substrate, such as a swab. I'm separating my egg yolk from my egg white. I then do a semi-quantitative set that just tells me about how much DNA is in that tube, because you can't see DNA with the naked eye. We then do a procedure called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR. It just amplifies the regions of DNA that we're interested in. These regions won't tell me your eye color, your hair color, but they're very individualistic to each person except for identical twins. I then load it on my final instrument and develop DNA profiles which separate out the 15 different locations and sexing location that we look at. They're separated out by size. I then, for each case, would sit down, interpret the profiles to say whether they're single source or mixture. With DNA, you get half your DNA from mom and half your DNA from dad. So at any one of my 15 locations, if I see more than 2 peaks, I'm looking at a mixture of DNA from more than one individual. I'll make determinations on whether I think those profiles are suitable for interpretation, develop any stat sheets to that, then I'll compare to any known buccal samples or known DNA profiles I've developed. So DNA, like many forensic scientists, is a comparison. So I can't tell you if I develop a DNA profile. I can simply say it's a male or a female profile until I have a known buccal sample that I develop a DNA profile for, or a known blood sample that tells me that's to come from a known individual what their DNA profile is. I would then compare any knowns in the case, issue a report to my findings that's been technically reviewed, and then sometimes come to court to testify.
We had your supervisor, Paul Bush, testify, and so we certainly know that he was working as a DCI criminalist in 1990. We know that you arrived 19 years later at the lab. Can you tell us, though, based on your education and your training and experience, how DNA analysis has developed or changed since 1990?
Well, back in the 1990s, they weren't actually doing what's called DNA analysis. They were doing ABO blood typing or basic serology. While we still do some of the screening tests that they did for the screening for the presence of seminal fluid or blood, we no longer do that serology. We actually develop DNA profiles. DNA analysis really didn't come into forensics until the early 2000s. And so at that point, the section transitioned over into doing DNA analysis. And we've had several increases in sensitivity, changes to personal protective equipment that we use, such as masks and gloves are now, in the DNA days, as DNA has advanced, are super essential. We also need a lot less DNA or stain to develop a DNA profile. Back in the ABO blood days, you needed quite a large amount of stain to try to develop the ABO blood type. Now in DNA, we need the equivalent of about 10 to 20 DNA individual skin cells. We can get some parts of a DNA profile. So it's made a whole huge change in what we can do.
Were you assigned to do DNA analysis for items relating to a case involving Stanley Liggins with a victim by the name of Jennifer Lewis?
Yes, I was.
These items were submitted to you by the Davenport Police Department?
Yes.
Did you complete a report as to what you did and what your findings were with regard to these items?
Yes, I did.
What I'm going to hand you now, Ms. Seehaffer, is an exhibit marked states proposed exhibit 208. And I'd ask you just to review that for yourself. I believe it's 7 pages if I'm not wrong.
Yes, this is a copy of the report that I issued in this case, including all 7 pages.
And it's a photocopy or a printout, I guess I should say.
Yes.
And it's a fair and accurate copy of your report?
Yes.
I offer states exhibit 208.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 208 is in there.
According to my notes or my count, it appears that there are listed in your report 25 items that you reviewed that were brought to you. Does that sound correct?
I know there was over 20. Your Honor, may I look at my notes to do an accurate count?
Yes, you may.
There was 25 items submitted, one that was actually maintained at the laboratory and then was resubmitted from our storage.
Following your analysis and comparison of these items, well, first of all, what were you doing with these items, basically?
So these items, when I was asked to examine, any of the question items that weren't unknown, depending on what the item was, I was looking for the presence of biological fluids or hairs. So I might be looking, if it was a fluorescent stain or a stain off-white color, I might be looking for the presence of seminal fluid. If it was a dark brown or reddish stain, I would be screening for the presence of blood. I was then going to re-examine all the items. If it was something that was touched or handled, then I would swab it, trying to get touch DNA off of different, or contacts, such as a pop bottle, I would swab the mouth area to try to develop DNA profiles from those items. And so I would have systematically went through all the question items in the case and tried to first screen for the presence of biological fluids, decided at that point whether we're going to take a sample or not to move on to DNA, and then proceeded through the case.
And did you have any positive findings in doing your comparison to knowns and the items submitted to you reflected in this report?
Yes, there were several items I was able to develop a DNA profile and associate with a known as coming from an individual that I had a known in the case.
And can you tell me what your findings were?
Yes, I can. Do you want me to, where do you want me to start?
Were these all related to one item as far as finding a known?
There were several different items that I was able to associate to one specific known, and then there was also items that were associated to another in a different item.
All right, let's start with item 11. Did you have positive findings with regard to item 11? And let's say what that's identified as.
Okay. Yes, item 11 is a comforter, and I first would have done screening tests on it. So this specific item, 10 stains screened positive for the presence of seminal fluid, and I did find microscopically identify spermatozoa. And then I attempted to develop DNA profiles from all of those 10 stains.
And what were the results?
All those stains are going to have a sub-item number, so I'll refer to them just for awareness as 11 point something, and that'll just be a sub-item of item 11. First, the partial DNA profile that I got information at 8 of the 15 locations from the sperm fraction of stain 11.3 was consistent with the known DNA profile of Stanley Liggins. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 320 million. But because these are seminal fluid samples, I also have an epithelial fraction from that sample as well. And that epithelial fraction, I was unable to develop a DNA profile from stain 11.3.
Next.
The next stain that I sampled was the sperm fraction for stain 11.4. Once again, I got a partial DNA profile at 8 of the 15 loci that was consistent with the known DNA profile of Stanley Liggins. This time, the probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 5.2 billion. Once again, the epithelial fraction or the skin cell fraction from the sperm stain did not yield a DNA profile. The next stain sampled is 11.5. Once again, it was a partial DNA profile. I only got information at 8 out of the 15 loci. It was also consistent with the known DNA profile of Stanley Liggins. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 1 billion. And once again, the epithelial fraction failed to produce a DNA profile. The next stain was stain 11.6. Once again, a partial DNA profile, 9 out of 15 loci, was developed from the sperm fraction. It was once again consistent with the known as Stanley Liggins. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 100 billion. Once again, the epithelial fraction also failed to produce a DNA profile. So I'm getting profiles from the sperm fraction, but not from the skin fraction. The next stain from these 10 stains was 11.7. It was a weaker partial profile with only 6 locations of information out of the 15. It was once again consistent with the profile, the known profile of Stanley Liggins. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 100,000. This time, the weak partial DNA profile, 3 out of 15 loci, was obtained from the epithelial fraction from 11.7. However, it showed a weak mixture of at least 2 individuals, but all the DNA factors there were just too weak for any conclusive interpretation, so I can see a small amount of DNA there, and I can see that it at least has more than 1 individual there, but I cannot conclusively identify who was in that stain. The next one is 11.8, and the DNA factors from both the sperm and epithelial fraction of that stain were just too weak for any conclusive interpretation. The next one was 11.10, the sperm fraction. The DNA factors were just too weak for any conclusive interpretation. and the weak partial DNA profile, the epithelial fraction, showed a weak mixture again of at least 2 individuals. We only had 3 locations of information, and it was once again just too weak for any conclusive interpretation. Stain 11.12, the sperm fraction showed a partial again of 8 out of 15 loci that was consistent with the known DNA profile of Stanley Liggins. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 5.2 billion. Once again, the epithelial fraction, I had information at 4 out of 15 loci. It was a weak mixture of at least 2 individuals, but it was just too weak for me to do any conclusive interpretation. Stain 11.13 was a partial DNA profile, 12 out of 15 locations from the sperm fraction. Once again, was consistent with the known DNA profile of Stanley Liggins. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 100 billion. The partial DNA profile, 10 out of 15 loci, or locations for the epithelial fraction from the same stain, showed a mixture of at least 2 individuals. The partial DNA profile of the major contributor I was able to resolve at 9 out of the 15 locations, and it was consistent with the known of Stanley Liggins. Probably finding this in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 660 million. The additional DNA factors for the second contributor, however, were just too weak for me to conclusively say who the second contributor is to that stain. The last seminal fluid stains that screened positive for seminal fluid was stain 11.14. Once again, the sperm fraction, I was able to develop a partial profile at 8 out of 15 loci that was consistent with the known of Stanley Liggins. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 5.2 billion. The epithelial fraction for that same stain was a weak partial DNA profile, 9 out of 15 loci, and it was consistent with the known of Stanley Liggins, with the probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 11 billion. Those were the only stains that screened positive for seminal fluid. I ran DNA testing on an additional 5 stains that did not screen positive for presence of seminal fluid.
Did you also receive positive results with regard to some toilet paper that was located as well, that being identified as item 8?
Yes.
And what did you find there?
Specifically, item 8 contained 4 pieces of toilet paper and broken crackers in a clear wrapper, which I didn't examine the crackers in the clear wrapper. Screening tests on 1 piece of the toilet paper indicated the presence of seminal fluid and spermatozoa were microscopically found. Once again, I developed a sperm fraction. The partial profile at 14 of the 15 loci was consistent with the known of Stanley Liggins, with the probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 100 billion. The epithelial fraction, I also developed a profile, was a partial, 10 out of 15 loci, was consistent with the known DNA profile of Stanley Liggins. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 24 billion. The additional 7 stains did not screen positive for the presence of, the screen test did not screen positive for the presence of seminal fluid. I did try to develop profiles from those. One of them, stain 8.2, was consistent with the known of Stanley Liggins, with the probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 100 billion. Stain 8.3 was a partial profile, 3 out of 15 of at least 2 individuals, however, once again, just too weak for anything, any conclusive interpretation.
What was that?
Too weak for any conclusive interpretation. Stain 8.4 and 8.8, I also was able to develop interpretable DNA profiles. 8.4 was a partial, where I had information at 10 of the 15 loci, and that was consistent with the known DNA profile of Stanley Liggins. That had a probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 8.9 billion. 8.8, I had information as a partial at 14 of the 15 loci that was consistent with the known DNA profile of Stanley Liggins. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 100 billion. The other profiles that I attempted from stains 8.5 to 8.7 were just too weak for any conclusive interpretation.
Now tell us about doing DNA analysis of hair. Is that possible?
Yes, it is. We specifically only do nuclear DNA analysis at the DCI Crime Laboratory. So when you do DNA analysis on the hair, we're really looking to get at the root end of the hair, and it needs to have preferably a tissue tag to get more DNA, or be in the early stages of the hair. If it's a hair that's loose and about ready to fall out, there's not enough DNA there for us to do nuclear testing. So that all has to have a microscopic examination done prior to determining whether we move on for nuclear DNA testing on those hairs. And that, and specifically in this case, was conducted by my supervisor, criminalist Paul Bush.
Were you able to find any positive identification of DNA on any of the hair samples that you were given? Any of those microscopic samples developed by Mr. Bush?
A few of the hairs I was able to develop a DNA profile, but those profiles were not associated to any of the known DNA profiles developed in this case.
Were you, it appears in your report, item 31, that's the sexual assault kit of Jennifer Lewis.
Yes,
And you did analysis on that, is that correct?
yes, I did examine that item.
And can you tell the jury about what you did and what your findings were?
Specifically with the sex assault case of Jennifer Lewis, the first thing I did is that I conducted screening tests to see if there was the presence of seminal fluid on some of the swabs in there. Specifically, screening tests did not indicate the presence of seminal fluid on the vaginal, oral, and rectal swabs in the kit. I went ahead and tried to develop DNA profiles from those samples. I also cut a portion of the known blood sample from that for the known of Jennifer Lewis to develop a DNA profile. However, specifically the known in this case, I was only able to develop a partial DNA profile, 8 out of 15 loci from the known blood standard. So the incomplete female profile from the vaginal swab was concordant with the partial DNA profile from the known blood standard for Jennifer Lewis, so that was used for the known DNA profile for Jennifer Lewis for a comparison for the rest of the case, because it was the most complete and concordant with all samples I had in the case for her. And the other two items, the oral and the rectal swabs, there was no DNA factors foreign to Jennifer Lewis detected in the profiles developed from them.
What was the condition of the items that you received to compare as far as the sexual assault kit?
The assault kit, I could tell, had been examined before me, prior to me. I don't have any specific notes in it, but it has exhibit marks from different people's writing from different times it was submitted to lab. It had DAB reports, so it had been packed, it had been sealed several times, but I have no designation that it was anything other than that.
And you knew that you were aware that the actual sexual assault kit was collected from Jennifer's body on the early morning hours of September 18th of 1990. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware when it was collected, however, I know that it was previously examined at the laboratory and collected at autopsy.
Learning that the collection from Jennifer's body with regard to the sexual assault was done that long ago, do you have an opinion as to what that kind of time elapse would do as far as the ability to get a DNA profile?
Well, we can get DNA profiles from a sample collected years ago. Sometimes you can actually, as it ages, depending on how things were properly stored or stored at the time, it may cause bacterial growth, which I don't note any of that on that, or mold can cause the DNA. If it wasn't stored at an ambient temperature, we prefer it to be in a non-humid environment. That could have some indications on the quality of the DNA. We obviously don't want it to be stored in sunlight because that can degrade DNA. All different factors can cause DNA to be of a less high quality for me to be able to develop a profile from.
What are some factors that cause DNA to degrade?
Specifically, you can have bacterial issues that cause DNA to degrade. You can have heat, sunlight. You can, if you use different solutions on them, we suggest collecting DNA with sterile water or PBS, but if you would, chemicals can cause degradation. Liquid, any kind of liquid could actually dilute DNA or fracture the cell membranes, and then the DNA is exposed to the environment that can also cause degradation of DNA.
What about accelerants?
Any chemical could have a harsh effect on DNA.
Did you, in doing your analysis, did you have a lot of partial profiles that you came across?
Yes, I did.
And do you have an opinion as to why many of the profiles DNA profiles you obtained were merely partial profiles?
Yes.
And will you tell us what that is?
So we look at 15 different locations, and some of them are small DNA fragments and some of them are large DNA fragments. So as you heard from my earlier testimony, a lot of my profiles are partials. Well, your larger DNA segments are more likely to be degraded because the way our PCR process is, to make our copy machine work, our toner sits down on the outside of that region we're looking at. Well, a larger region is more likely to be degraded because if I miss one piece or another, I've broken off the area that basically my toner colors sit down on. So most of my profiles, actually what we call is a typical degradation look, is a ski slope. So my short loci, or locations, my small DNA fragments, I was getting information from. But my larger, on the right side of my graph, is a profile to you guys which look like just peaks on a graph. I'm having them drop out or have no peaks there at all. So that's a typical ski slope that would be due to degradation.
And that was your experience in this case?
Yes.
I have no further questions for you. These attorneys.
Any cross-examine?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Without reading the list of the things that you examined, you know, clothing, bed sheets, things like that, do you know where they came from?
I would have to refer to my notes. It would have to be simply what the police department had marked on it. I wouldn't have collected any of that or known if they did not have descriptions on it.
Okay. You don't know what address those things came from?
I would not, sir.
It's not a stretch, though, to surmise that came from either a bedroom or some residence, correct?
Yes, I assume that it came from its bedding, so that usually comes from a residence.
And the bedding that was collected, was a resident of Stanley Liggins, it wouldn't be unusual to have this fluid in on the bedding, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I would, if the bedding was owned by Mr. Liggins, then it would be expected that he would have DNA profiles from different body fluids on the bedding.
And the DNA report that you prepared was related to testing that you did in what year?
Specifically, the case came in 2014, but the testing I did, I started in 2015 and 16, and my report was issued in May 31st of 2016.
So I understand that DNA or cells can degrade, but in this case, after 26 years, you are able to have sufficient samples to create DNA matches on, say, Mr. Liggins' sheets, correct?
I was able to develop DNA profiles that were partials, that were consistent with, they were not full, so I can't say a match statement, but that were consistent with Mr. Liggins' profile.
And because it's 26 years later that you're doing it, I assume that you cannot age DNA. You can't say what time that stain got there.
No, none of my testing will date the DNA analysis of when a stain was deposited.
Or under what conditions the stain got there.
The only way I can say the stain, I can't say the action the stain got there. My screening tests do indicate that it's a seminal fluid stain for some of the stains, but my screening tests don't tell action.
And since chemicals and cleaners and things like that can affect DNA, presumably there's nothing to indicate that those sheets or clothes or anything like that were laundered in between the time that those stains were generated and the time that you saw it.
I would have no way to know that. My notes don't indicate that it's smelled that they were freshly laundered sheets. However, this was evidence collected a long time ago, so I have no way of knowing. The sheets show up in a specific, at the laboratory, and then I just examined from there. So it wasn't like they smelled bounce fresh. I'm not sure there was any bounce back in the day, but.
Well, if they had been laundered and it got stuck in a washing machine, then that seminal fluid would be gone.
Most likely the seminal fluid would be gone. It just depends on the quality of detergent, the heat. Obviously hot water gets rid of stains better than a cold water wash, as we all know from spilling ketchup on our shirts. So some DNA could be left behind, but the majority of the DNA should be washed away with the wash.
Thank you, ma'am.
No. Thank you, Ms. Second.
The state calls Alan Czarnetzki to the stand. Come forward and be sworn by the court, please.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Tell us your name, please.
Alan Czarnetzki,
Please spell your first and last names for us.
A-L-A-N, now the hard part, C-Z-A-R-N-E-T-Z-K-I.
What is your occupation?
I'm a professor of meteorology at the University of Northern Iowa.
Professor what, sorry?
Meteorology,
At UNI.
yes.
Will you review for us your education, training, and experience in your field?
Sure, I have my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD in atmospheric science from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. I had been an intern in the National Weather Service in the early 1980s when I was a student. I've been at the University of Northern Iowa, this is my 27th year as a professor, and I was the weather forecaster on Iowa Public Radio, KUNI, for about 6.5 years.
What I'm going to do now, Dr. Czarnetzki, is show you some items that have been identified as state's proposed exhibit 90, 91, and 211. And we'll review them one at a time here. Can you identify for us what state's proposed exhibit 90 is?
It's a set of surface airways observations. They're observations of surface weather conditions, and they're listed by the hour for Moline, Illinois.
And can you see the date?
This date is September 24th, 1990.
And state's proposed exhibit 91.
The same observations also for Moline. It's up for September 17th, 1990.
And what is state's proposed exhibit 211?
This is the local climatological summary or data from Moline, Illinois, and this is for the entire month of September 1990.
Starting with proposed exhibits 90 and 91. Again, those are pretty much the same thing except 1 week apart, September 17th and September 24th, 1990.
That's correct.
And are those relied upon by meteorologists, by those who need to rely on reports with regard to climate to determine what weather factors there were for a given day?
It's probably the most detailed way to present the surface observations. It's on an hourly basis here. And they also include special observations if something significant changed between hours. And sometimes when you see a summary of conditions, you don't get that hourly detail. So yes, this is the format that we would look at to get the greatest detail.
And on state's exhibits 90 and 91, who would have compiled the data that's contained in those reports?
They would have been Weather Service personnel at the Weather Service office in Moline.
Your Honor, I offer state's exhibits 90 and 91.
No objection.
90 and 91 are agreement?
And now state's proposed exhibit 211. Is that document relied upon as well with regard to weather forecasting or weather history for a given day or a given time period?
Yes, very much so. This probably is the official record of surface weather observations. It doesn't have quite the hourly detail that the previous items have, but this is the one that can be certified for use in the court of law.
And in fact, it is. It's got a nice seal on it.
Yes.
Pretty blue ribbon.
Yes.
I offer state's exhibit 211 into evidence, Your Honor.
No objection.
Exhibit 211 is agreement?
Now, when we refer to exhibits 90 and 91, you said that has hourly weather conditions, is that right?
Yes.
Now, and even exhibit 211, are there any adjustments that need to be made with regard to Central Standard Time versus daylight savings time?
Yes, most official weather records that are kept are for standard time, local standard time, and so we would have to adjust the times for daylight savings time, which would have been in effect at this part of the year.
So when we look at those documents, how do we make the adjustment then?
You would spring forward, right? We add an hour to the times that are listed there. So.
All right. Can you, referring to the exhibits and looking at data for September 17th of 1990, are you able to tell us what the low temperature was for September 17th, 1990?
Yes. I guess I can find it in a couple of different ways here. September 17th.
Yes.
The low temperature was 42 in Moline.
And what was the high temperature on September 17th, 1990?
70 Fahrenheit.
And can you tell us, now I'm going to ask you about precipitation. Do you see whether or not there was any precipitation, any rain on September 17th of 1990?
There was none.
How about September 18th of 1990?
There was some precipitation on the 18th.
Can you tell us about that?
It was 0.12 of an inch was observed in Moline.
What does that mean to an average person?
Well, it's barely an eighth of an inch, so it's measurable precipitation, not terribly significant, but.
Do those documents in front of you tell you when that precipitation occurred on September 18th?
No, not the documents that I have. That's the value of the hourly reports where you could. I'm sorry. Actually, I may be able to figure that. They do show. This document does have. Let's see here. It does break it down, and the climatological summary here, the climatological data, they do list hourly precipitation, so on the 18th I would be able to determine when that precipitation occurred.
Okay, can you tell us, please?
It looks like the first report was a trace inch, which is not measurable. The precipitation was observed that's less than 1/100 of an inch is the least amount that can be measured. And that was first reported at 8 a.m. standard time, so that would have been 9 a.m. daylight time. And then there was precipitation measurable 1/100 of an inch at 10 a.m. Daylight time, 0.04 of an inch at 11 a.m., 1/100 of an inch at noon, a trace at 2 p.m. daylight time, 0.04 at 3 p.m., another 100th at 4 p.m., trace at 5, 6, and 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 1/100 of an inch, and then a trace of an inch at each of the hours up through midnight.
And this is all for September 18th.
Yes.
And finally, do those documents in front of you tell you when sunset would have been on September 17th?
I believe Exhibit 91 does show that here. It lists character of sunrise and sunset. Oh, yes, it does. It lists the summary of the day. It lists the sunset time would have been 7:10 p.m. daylight time.
So, do we add that, or is that the?
That would be daylight time. Local time in effect then would have been 7:10 p.m.
All right, thank you. I have no further questions for you, Dr. Czarnetzki, Peace Attorney, so for your May.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Doctor.
Hello.
You hear about heat indexes or what it actually feels like. Is there any way to discern from there what things might have felt like?
Not easily. There is. You're right. There's a heat index. There's a wind chill index, and and those are not regularly reported within the body of the hourly reports. Usually it's an added product that is shared with the general public, but it doesn't often become part of an official record because you can always determine that from the actual observations.
And this, what it feels like, would vary from individual to individual anyway, wouldn't it?
There certainly is some variability in how people perceive things, yes.
I can be perfectly comfortable sitting here like this, and another individual might think it's a little chilly in here.
Right.
And you wouldn't be an expert at all about how the heat in the atmosphere might affect the inside of the house that was closed up, would you?
Well, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on that. The way that we might use weather information to that end is we can determine heating degree days and cooling degree days, which is based on the average temperature for a day and how much that differs from a benchmark of 65 degrees. And so utilities will use that to kind of help you determine for a given month how much energy may you have needed for heating or cooling purposes. But other than that, no.
But presumably, if you walk into a house that was closed off and it was chilly in there, the outside temperature would have to be at least chilly. If there was no AC or no heat, correct?
I suppose it would depend on how long the structure was closed up.
Same was true if it was described as being hot or stifling within that structure. It just depends on the time, correct?
It could.
Thank you, sir.
Anything further?
No redirect, thank you very much.
Thank you for your second.
State calls Richard Lindbom, please stand. Come forward and be sworn by the court, please.
Just raise your right hand. You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Tell us your name, please.
That's Rich Lindbom, Lindbom.
Are you currently working?
No, I am retired.
Where are you retired from?
The Davenport Police Department,
When did you retire from the Davenport Police Department?
about 3 years ago.
Will you review for us your experience with the Davenport Police?
I was there a little under 31 years. I spent a year in the Street Crimes Vice Unit, 3.5 to 4 years in the Detective Bureau. I was in the gang unit twice. Moved out of there for promotions, and then my last 15 years I was a sergeant patrol, and then I ran the K-9 program there as well.
We've had, obviously had other members of the Davenport Police Department testify. They attended the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy. Did you do so?
Yes, I did.
And receive your certification?
Yes,
And that was at the beginning of your career with Davenport?
1985.
What I want to do, Mr. Lindbom, is direct your attention to events occurring beginning on September 17th of 1990. Were you working in the Detective Bureau at that time?
Yes, I was.
Did you become assigned to the case to investigate, to assist in the investigation into the murder of Jennifer Lewis?
I responded to the crime scene when the initial call came out, and then as the investigation continued, I was assigned different follow-up tasks.
Did that include doing what's called a canvass of the area where Jennifer used to live?
Yes.
And generally, what area were you looking at?
On that one, I believe it was 4.5 Street off of Marquette.
And you had some information that Jennifer at one point in her life had lived there.
Correct.
And so you were instructed to do a canvass of that area.
Yes.
And when we've had other testimony with regard to what a canvass is, but why don't you go ahead and tell us what you did when you canvassed?
I think we did some canvass at the initial crime scene around there, and myself and other detectives try and find, see if anybody's home or see if they saw anything or heard anything.
Did you, during your canvass, the area where you understood Jennifer to have lived at some point in her life, did you do a canvass and interview a person by the name of Roberta Cadera?
Yes, I did.
And did you do a report regarding that?
Yes, I did.
And do you have that report in front of you?
Yes, I do.
You obviously, it's been a while, right?
Yes, it has.
All right. So in order to be accurate in your testimony, do you prefer to look at your report?
If I need to.
Where did Roberta Cadera live?
That was 422 Myrtle Street.
And is that where you would have gone then to interview her on your canvas?
Yes, I was at a couple.
Speaking with the Brenda Ave. Investigation and speaking with the Brenda Ave.
Yes.
Did you participate in receiving some receipts for her to show her whereabouts on the 18th of September?
No, I don't recall that.
You interviewed several people when you went out to speak with the Caderas, is that right?
Just a second. At the Cadera's house or other locations?
Just around that time frame. Here they canvass.
On this report here, I spoke with somebody at 1115 West 4.5 Street, another person at 1113 West 4.5 Street, and then 3 people at 422 Myrtle.
So, let me see if I can. So you spoke with an individual, and you would note the time and the date, correct?
Yes, that's on here.
Okay, so without the name, the first person that you spoke with would have been on the 18th at 9:25, is that correct?
Yes,
The next individual was on the same day at 9:50.
yes, that's what's on here.
Yeah. Another individual on the same day at 9:40.
Yes,
But also with Ms. Cadera on the same day, also at 9:40, correct?
that's what's on here, yes.
And then Mr. Cadera, you spoke with at 9:55, is that correct?
That's what I have here, yes.
Are you leaving and coming back?
No,
But the second person that you interviewed on that sheet at 1113 West 4.5 Street, you also interviewed at 9:50, is that right?
that's what's on here.
But then you're also saying that you interviewed Mr. Cadera at 422 Myrtle at 9:55?
That's what's on here.
These were short interviews, correct?
No, well, the interview with Mr. Seafield It's very short. He said he didn't have any information.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
What?
That's sustained, don't say what he said, just answer the question, which was these were short interviews.
Yes, Your Honor.
One of them was shorter than the others.
The jury should disregard the previous answer.
Nothing further.
Did you redirect?
Mr. Lindbom, the length of the interview with these individuals or any witness is as long as they have, lasts as long as they have information to give you, is that right?
Correct.
So if they have no information, it's going to be a short interview.
Yes.
And you'll listen and write notes for as long as they give you information.
Correct. And then I would go back and dictate the narrative to be typed up by the secretary.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Anything further?
Did you participate in any searches in this case?
I was with some different Rock Island detectives, and I reread all my reports here, and there's a hotel in Rock Island. I was over there, I don't remember what day or what time, and then I don't remember if I was Miss Adams' house. Yeah, I believe I was. And that's in Milan.
In Milan? And so you helped participate in the search at the Miss Adams' house in Milan?
I was there. We were teamed up with Rock Island detectives, so I don't remember myself searching anything, but I was there.
Did you ever go to the Hillside Inn and participate in the search over there?
Is that the one you're calling the edge of Rock Island?
It's the Hillside Inn, let me show you. State's Exhibit 5. It's in Rock Island.
Yes, I interviewed some people there.
Okay, and then to the left of it is also Hillside Apartments, is that your understanding?
I was at the, if you can't see it too good.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you wanted to point at it.
I don't remember which one it was. I interviewed Miss Atkins was at one of those locations.
Did you prepare a report, if indeed you were in the room with Antonio Holmes, you didn't prepare a report related to that?
Well, I don't remember being there, so.
Well, and you brought your reports that you produced in this case, correct?
And I just looked through them, and I don't have anything involving that individual, no.
I don't have anything further.
Anything further?
No redirect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, you may step down.
I said, or speak the outside.
Anything you can do in 15 minutes?
Your Honor, we could read in a short transcript. And then there was also the issue about tomorrow's travel. We probably can discuss before the end of the day, so whatever the court prefers.
Well, we need to do some things outside the presence of the jury anyway, so that we can discuss that. So should we do the transcript now?
Sure.
At this time, Your Honor, we are going to present to the jury Exhibit 504, which is the prior sworn testimony of Stephen Eck, will be read by Mike Walton.
Exhibit 504 is admitted.
Stephen Eck, called as a witness on behalf of the state, being first duly sworn by the court, testified as follows. Would you tell these folks who you are, what you do?
Stephen Eck. I'm employed at the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, Criminalistics Laboratory in Des Moines, Iowa, as a criminalist.
What is a criminalist?
A person who receives and examines physical evidence in a criminal case. My particular areas of expertise are in the area of alcohol analysis and in the area of toxicology.
So we see you testifying in OWI cases, things of that nature.
I do some OWI cases. I also do any death investigations.
Tell us about your background.
I received a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the Iowa State University and a Master of Science degree in inorganic chemistry from Indiana University. After taking this job at the Criminalistics Laboratory, I received further training in alcohol analysis. I also received training in the area of toxicology at Northwest Indiana Criminal Toxicology Laboratory in Gary, Indiana.
As to this particular case, were items sent to you for analysis?
Yes, they were.
And did you receive them?
Yes, I did.
Did you perform certain tests?
Yes, I did.
And is that sort of the way you do business? Did you prepare a report?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to hand you what the court reporter has marked as State's Exhibit 101. Can you tell me whether or not that is such a report?
Yes, it is.
And is that your report?
Yes, it's a copy of my report.
We offer State's Exhibit 101 into evidence, Your Honor.
No objection.
101 will be received.
You can feel free to refer to your report, and if you would you tell this jury just what you received when you received it?
I received a sample of lung tissue submitted to me. I actually received and began examining the tissue on October 2nd of 1990.
What tests did you do?
I ran tests on the fluid that was in the lung tissue. I looked for the presence of alcohol, presence of any volatile hydrocarbons, and the presence of carbon monoxide.
How do you do that?
In the case of alcohol involved with hydrocarbon, I put the sample on an instrument called a gas chromatograph. What that basically does is heat a sample. We take a vapor sample, inject by means of a syringe, and as it passes through the column, various materials in there will be separated out. As it comes through in this case, the detector at the end, and it will be detected if anything is present. By running known standards, we are able to determine what comes through.
And did you do that in this case?
Yes.
What is a hydrocarbon?
It's a substance which is made up of only two materials, carbon and hydrogen propane. Gasoline is a mixture of hydrocarbons. Most home heating fuels are a mixture of hydrocarbons.
What did you determine?
I determined that no volatile hydrocarbon was present and no alcohol was present.
So the tests you ran, you were able to determine from the lung tissue that we gave you that present in the lung tissue there wasn't any gas, there wasn't any kerosene or any of those in the family of hydrocarbons?
Yes, that is correct.
And no alcohol?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
You may cross-examine, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. The test that you indicated, the gas chromatograph,
Yes, that is correct.
that testing procedure allows you to determine the presence of alcohol or those hydrocarbons. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Could you briefly describe for the jury how that instrument works?
What we do is we take a sample of the material submitted. In this case, I took a sample of the bloody fluid with the lung. I put it in a small vial and capped the vial. If there is any volatile hydrocarbon, which means they will be liquid, will turn to gas in normal temperature, and that will be trapped in the area above the liquid in the vial. And I took a syringe and injected it out of the vial and injected that sample onto an instrument called gas chromatograph. There is a column in there with something like fine sand-like material. As it passes through this column, various materials there are separated out depending on various chemical properties. As it reaches the end of the column, it goes through a detector, and in this case, it's called a flame ionization detector, and any burnable material at the end, and it will be recorded on a chart. As I said, I did this and I found nothing.
You found no presence of any gasoline or hydrocarbon and no presence of alcohol, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That would indicate to you, based on your training and experience, those substances were not present in the lungs from which the tissue was taken.
Yes, that is correct.
The lung tissue, did you run any other tests concerning that?
Yes, I also ran a test on the fluid from the lung tissue to determine if any carbon monoxide was present.
For what purpose would you run that test to determine whether there was carbon monoxide present?
To determine if the person was alive at the time of the fire or combustion around that person.
So the result of that test would tell you whether or not the person was alive at the time of the fire.
It could give some indication. It would be the pathologist or medical examiner to make that determination.
And what type of test did you run to determine that factor?
I ran a test using a CO oximeter.
Could you briefly describe how that particular instrument works?
This instrument is basically what is called ultraviolet spectrophotometer, and it's looking at various wavelengths of light from a sample. And in this case, you take a sample of blood and measure those wavelengths of light. And it will determine three things: the amount of oxygen present in the blood sample, determine the amount of carbon monoxide present in the blood sample, and also determine the amount of hemoglobin, which is the material that binds the oxygen. Carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide material to the blood molecule. And that's the way the test is run. It's drawn up through the ultraviolet. Those three readings are then read, and you can get a result from that.
And did you run that type of test on the lung tissue that was submitted to you?
Yes, I ran it on the fluid from the lung tissue.
And what was the result of that particular test?
Excuse me, I found less than 1% carboxyhemoglobin was detected in the bloody fluid.
And carboxyhemoglobin is what?
That's the amount of carbon monoxide contained in the hemoglobin.
Is there any relevance of that?
That would indicate that the person had not breathed any complete combustion prior to the sample being taken.
Would that particular level of carboxyhemoglobin be within the normal limits of the living human beings?
Yes.
No further questions.
No redirect.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's 4:25. I'm going to give you a very good evening. We'll have some things we'll be working on. Please keep the admonition in mind. Do not discuss the case and continue to keep an open mind. We'll start again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Please rise to the jury. All right, we are outside the presence of the jury, still in open court with all counsel and Mr. Liggins present. We've had several sidebars today, with the exception of the last one. They were all, in my memory, basically scheduling issues. The last sidebar, we discussed two things, and I'd like to put those on the record so we're all clear. We had a discussion about whether the audio tape of Antonio Holmes' interview can be played for the jury. We decided, or I helped decide, that Mr. Lindbom could be excused because there's already enough, I believe, foundation in the record to have that admitted if it does come in. I'm going to allow both sides to make an argument to me on whether it should be admitted or not. We don't have to do that tonight, we can do that tomorrow or sometime during your case.
Right.
Makes sense to do it in your case, Mr. Hallbaker?
Correct.
So if you're going to do that, give me a little bit of notice and or give me some law that you think supports your side. Also, the other issue that we discussed was the state agreed that if there's any portion of the Christopher Cadera's interview with Mr. Lindbom that was redacted from Exhibit 212, which is the report, that rather than recalling Officer Lindbom, the state would not object to that paragraph regarding Christopher Cadera being introduced without calling Lindbom back. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor. If it's deemed that that prior statement is admissible, we would agree that it could come through the report rather than Officer Lindbom. We are not conceding that the statement is admissible at this stage.
So if it can be determined to be inconsistent or something that will allow it to be admitted, we just allow it to come in once that decision is made.
That's correct.
Anything else that we talked about that you'd like to go over with respect to that before we get to the other issue?
We were asking that Mr. Lindbom be informed that he remains in the subpoena. We did ask that back, just in case, because I understand the condition that we have right now. It's just in case. I'm not saying he can't go home, okay? For some reason that we need to, if there's some, and I can't foresee it, but if there's some reason that we need to get him back here, because the reality is, the record of this case so far, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, if you look, we know that Mr. New was in the room at the time when Mr. New has passed away. And to my memory, the only way that we acknowledged that Officer Lindbom was in that room during the Antonio Holmes interview was Mr. Walton telling us that much at one of the hearings related to that transcript. And so it's the establishing he was in there, independent of Mr. Walton. And I'm not sure what reason we may need to call him back, but I really ask that he just, we're more releasing if we're not going to use him. If we need to get him back, we're not trying to be difficult. Okay?
Mr. Walton?
I actually believe what I did is refer to the fact that Mr. Lindbom is mentioned in Detective Mills' report.
Oh, that's correct. The second, in the report of the transcript, I can't remember my name.
One of them that he's actually referred to, and that's how we came to know that he was present at the time. The witness, Rich Lindbom, testified even after reviewing Mills' transcript of the report, has testified he has no recollection of being present at that time. 28 years ago, I'm sure he interviewed hundreds of people, but I think the state's position is that Antonio Holmes has adopted and admitted to making all of those statements.
We'll do some research tonight on that additional issue. My intention too, Your Honor, because I think it will be important, is that I'm making sure that we have a clean disc burn of that, because I think it will be important for the hear and have that available.
I have not heard it, so that
Right.
would be helpful when we have the argument on that particular issue. Is there a problem with just asking Lindbom to be aware that he may be called back? Most likely not, but could be called back.
And we would just need, I don't even need to have it, we would just need funding or be able to more investigators.
I'm not in a position to volunteer Mr. Lindbom's time at this point, he would be, I can ask, I can try and reach out to him. I just don't want to be placed in that position right now. I haven't talked to him.
You can serve it right now. We have blanks to do this here. And again, I'm not trying to be difficult, but
Is he still here?
I don't know. I've been in corporate
Do you
retirement.
know Nancy, is he still here?
I don't know, he's not out in the hallway.
I'm not trying to be difficult either. I just can't commit to something I haven't verified.
I'm not asking you to quit, I just want to.
Well, I have no problem telling you that he's not released on the screen yet, but obviously he's not here, I can't tell you.
Right. I had to believe as he was leaving the courtroom, he was asking to speak with Mr. Walden, our attorney, still in here. And I believe Mr. Walden was on 4:30, that's why I had the assumption he was still here.
I will try to secure Mr. Lindbom's future cooperation. I just don't want to commit to him. I don't know what his schedule is. I just can't do it.
All right, we'll do this, try and talk to him this evening if you can. Let us know tomorrow morning if he has a problem with any type of timing or coming back. And if he does, then I think, Mr. Hallbaker, you're going to have to just have him serve this meeting. Okay?
Understood.
All right, anything else with respect to that sidebar or these two issues before we talk about tomorrow?
Oh, yeah.
All right, now tomorrow, I understand we're going to have a jury review.
We would like, yes, Your Honor, we would like to do that.
Any idea when we're going to be looking at that?
Well, subject to the council report's approval, I thought perhaps the first thing in the morning would be the best time to accomplish that. And then just call witnesses from there and get that done. And we are making arrangements with the Black Hawk County Sheriff's Department. I've not, again, been involved in that because of my presence here all day, but my understanding is those arrangements are being made and are a possibility. I think the only difficulty would be transporting jurors. I'm not sure they can do that.
Well, I understand from Pat, our court attendant, that the jurors are willing to walk. One juror asked if he could use his cane, which obviously he can, and maybe it was still going, but they all said they could walk there and back, block and a half, they don't know where. So I think that if they walk as a group, escorted by the sheriff's deputy, that would work. And do you plan on counsel, Mr. Liggins, myself, and the court reporter to be already at place for the trial?
That's how I would envision it, yes.
And what we'll do is have the court reporter just take down, and you will explain, this is the card, and turn lights on, turn lights off, and there will be no other testimony taken, no questions asked or comments made by anyone.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Mr. Hallbaker?
Nothing said once we leave this room, right? That's the idea.
Pardon?
Nothing will be said once we leave this room.
Right. Other than him saying, I turn lights on, turn lights off, I think I think he has to be able to say which lights he's turning on and off.
Understood.
Yes, there'll be no other conversation, questions, comments, or anything by any of the lawyers or myself.
Yes, Your Honor.
And I would ask the media not to publish the information in the paper that we are going to do a jury review at 9 a.m. because I do not want to have spectators doing that with the jury. So That would be my request. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Not quite continue, Your Honor.
All right, let's be here at 9 and we'll walk down. And we will have the jury.